Well, it's 10:30 on Thursday, so that means it's time for brainstorming the human connection with South Dakota Humanities Council. And we want to welcome everybody, those who are here already and those who will be coming later, because we're getting right on the button here, you know. So we have a very interesting conversation today with the Levitt Center, you know, or the whole. It's actually a platform, but they have a project actually, and we're going to be speaking with the executive director, Nancy Halverson, and also Rose Ann Hofland, who is the communications director. And I'm hoping that all of you will be writing down your questions or remembering your questions, because this is a good opportunity to find out not only what they're doing, but also how what you're doing might interact with what they're doing, how you can enjoy what they're doing, how you might even take some lessons from what they're doing and apply it to some projects that you might want to do. You might find out what their trials and tribulations, their challenges, etc. Those things could be useful, not only if you're putting on a project for your social group or even yourselves, but also just in terms of like how the world works. I always like to have background knowledge about how people put things together, because surprisingly, those things and opportunities to use what those people have learned come up in my daily life, even things like traveling or just organizing my house, or just maybe it's something you can offer to someone else when they're trying to put on some kind of program or project for their house or their church or their school or something like that. So I'm hoping that you all will learn something interesting that you can carry forward into your lives. And I guess that gives us enough fill time for other people to show up and Carol look to let them in. So we're going to welcome Rose Ann and Nancy. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Good, good. This is a kind of a special deal because you guys actually have recently done a project that you worked collaboratively with the South Dakota Humanities Council on. And so we're going to be exploring that. But first, I would like to learn a little bit about both of you. And I guess we'll start with Nancy. If you could tell us a little bit about where you're from and what kind of music you like to dance to or something, anything that you think that gives us your elevator speech so that people have a kind of a picture of who Nancy is.
All right. Well, thanks, Lawrence. Yeah. So I was actually born in Massachusetts, moved quite a bit as a child. My father worked for IBM. We always said it stood for I've been moved, because we moved so often, about every 3 years. And as a young person, I got involved in the arts because I found that with moving community to community, the arts was an easy place for me to connect and to find friends and to feel accepted, no matter what community I went to. So that carried on through college, and then went on to become a professional artist. I was doing a lot of musical theater, national tours, that sort of thing, and then decided to be a teacher. So I taught high school at a high school for performing arts for a long time, finished up there and became a professor of theater. So had a really terrific career in theater, and then moved into the museum world, ran a large children's museum for several years, and then came back to run the Levitt. So I'm a bit of a gypsy girl, but everything has sort of had the same mission, right? It's all been about using the arts to uplift our community.
And I'm going to throw that same question out to Rose Ann.
You bet.
Give us your elevator speech.
Thank you for having me. Yes, Rose Ann Hofland. I am a South Dakota native, grew up in Aberdeen, South Dakota, a great arts community. where I was raised by two teachers. So education, the love of education and the love of the arts have really been there in my family since the start. My mom was a music teacher. My dad was a theater teacher. They were both very involved as arts leaders. And so my brother and I have both been involved in the arts all along. I went to USD, got my degree in theater and English. And then after I graduated from college, Nancy was actually my first big kid boss right out of school with the children's theater that she was running in South Dakota, probably close to 20 years ago. So we toured around, did artist residency work throughout South Dakota, got to see many of the towns and communities and work with youth. After that, and when Nancy moved on to run the Children's Museum she talked about, I moved on to work at the Washington Pavilion, where I served as the Director of Education and Community Engagement for 12 years. And then when the Levitt started, I joined from the start. So Nancy and I have both been there since the inaugural year in 2019. My role has pivoted a little bit at the Levitt in that I'm in charge of now marketing as well as community engagement, but it's been a wonderful opportunity to sort of be a part of the next big arts opportunity in Sioux Falls. Yeah, and in my spare time, I also love to stay involved in theater locally in the Sioux Falls community too. So you might see me directing or on stage here or there.
Excellent, excellent. And I would like either or both of you to give us a kind of elevator speech for the Levitt Center. What is it? What's its purpose? And how did it? Well, first of all, how did it get started? What was the catalyst or impetus for it?
Sure. Well, I'll start and then Rose Ann, you pick up where, because I'm sure I'll miss something. So the Levitt is actually part of a national network of outdoor performing arts venues. They were started by the Levitt family. Mortimer and Mimi Levitt were wonderful philanthropists back at the turn of the century, really. Mortimer's father sold trinkets at Coney Island. He was very poor as a child. And he promised himself that if he ever made his millions, which he did, he would make music free for everyone, because as a child, he would go to the park with his dad and he would hear the music in the venues, but he didn't have the money to go in. So he wanted to make sure that every child had that opportunity. And that's why they started the Levitt Pavilions. So we were the 8th in the country. We're the smallest community to have a Levitt shell, which is quite an honor. And all of us have the same mission. It's all about building community through music. And so every Levitt does free concerts all summer long. We do 50, plus we do all of this additional outreach that Rose Ann is in charge of. So I don't know, Rose Ann, if you want to talk about the local efforts here.
Sure. So it was about 12 years ago that the dream of the Levitt came to be in Sioux Falls. There was a gentleman who was from the Sioux Falls area originally, who lived in Los Angeles, who had observed the Levitt in that community and called up a friend here in Sioux Falls, who many of you probably know, Tom Dempster, and said, we need one of these. This would be a wonderful thing for Sioux Falls. So essentially, over a decade of effort went into sort of the forming of a local nonprofit. We are a nonprofit organization, into the fundraising to make that happen. Every Levitt is a 3-way partnership between the National Foundation, which Nancy mentioned, our local nonprofit, and then the city of Sioux Falls. So the city of Sioux Falls actually owns the Levitt. It's a public park when we are not doing programming. And so all of those entities needed to come together and to essentially select a place that's an underutilized public space, but that had great potential. So they identified the space where you will find the Levitt now, which is in Falls Park West. What was previously, it was a salvage yard for many, many years in Sioux Falls. So it was difficult to figure out what to do with that land. It was going to be very expensive to develop. It just sort of sat empty for a very long time. And we had a very bustling downtown on, Phillips Avenue and Main Avenue to the south. And then we had this beautiful Falls Park, which is our #1 tourist destination in Sioux Falls to the north. And then this sort of space in between where there wasn't much going on. And so that was identified as the space for the Levitt. And for those of you that either live in Sioux Falls or have been to downtown Sioux Falls recently, I think think you can probably see the value of what a facility like the Levitt has brought to that neighborhood. There's a lot of development happening there. And it's been just really neat to see the activation, people just walking between Falls Park and the rest of downtown and really kind of connecting it into one great active cultural space where people want to live, work, and play.
Talk a little bit about the connection between the community, because I know, well, maybe we'll go back and talk first about your connection with the South Dakota Humanities Council. What's the collaboration there like?
You know, the Humanities Council has been very generous and supportive of us over the last couple of years. But this year, we took on probably our most ambitious project ever. It is a program called Innoskate, and it is a collaboration between the Levitt, the Smithsonian's American History Museum's Lemelson Center for Invention and Innovation, and USA Skateboarding, which is the governing organization that brought skateboarding to the Olympics. It was a project that started in Pine Ridge. We went out for a day and we brought out all kinds of professional skaters. We brought some musicians from the Smithsonian Master Jazz Works Orchestra, and we led workshops for kids there with two nonprofits that are in that area. One is Rock the Res, which is a summer camp for two-spirit transgender young people in Porcupine, and then Ground Control, which is a skateboard group in Pine Ridge. So we spent the day with all those young people and had an incredible experience there, just cultural exchange and just wonderful day. And then we brought those kiddos across state with us and had a 3-day festival here at the Levitt. We actually closed down the block around us. We had all kinds of robust panel conversations with leaders in the skateboard field, leaders from the Smithsonian, leaders from our community. And then we built a pop-up skate park for kind of professional level skaters. And then we built a smaller pop-up park for kids just learning how to skate. And of course, then we had lots of music. So we had a concert by the Smithsonian Master Jazz Works Orchestra, actually 2 concerts by them that weekend. Then we had a group called Meet Me at the Altar perform, and another DESA, another band. So it was just a robust weekend full of all kinds of cross-cultural programming, and we couldn't have done it without the help of the Humanities Council. It was the funding by the Humanities Council that allowed us to bring all these people to town.
That's amazing, and it's wonderful. It's the wonderful kind of work that the Humanities Council does. Let's talk about the longer term community collaborations that you do. This is one. What other kinds of collaborations are you involved in with various communities?
I can certainly take that. We are constantly working with different communities, specifically, typically more centered in Sioux Falls and our immediate area. Though Nancy mentioned with this last project, we were able to sort of expand our reach statewide. But we work with a lot of different community nonprofits, basically any of the groups that we see that perhaps haven't made it to the lawn to experience our programming yet. We want to make sure that, you know, while the Levitt is a very accessible space, and that's what we love about it, is there's no tickets, there's no walls. There are still barriers that keep people from participating in what we do. And so as we're looking to identify community partners, we're often looking at groups that might not be able to make it to the lawn or haven't made it yet, using opportunities with artists who are coming into our area to bring them out into the community, to extend that invitation, and to just share our work more broadly. So what that's looked like beyond Innoskate, which Nancy just mentioned, earlier this year, for example, we had a Latin Grammy winning artist for youth, Sonia de los Santos, who does just bilingual Spanish and English music for children. We brought her to an area preschool that served low income and families and essentially offered free preschool and summer daycare services. They aren't able to navigate transportation to come to the lawn for our Friday morning kids shows. So we brought Sonia to them and did a wonderful show out in a parking lot in their community center. We've worked with Lifescape and brought artists in to do special work with those adults with disabilities. This year, we also were able to bring one of our artists to the English as a Second Language summer program for middle schoolers. We had a wonderful Haitian group, Inez Barletier, and she brought an African drumming workshop to some of the middle schoolers for whom English is a second language. We've worked with South Dakota Urban Indian Health. We've worked with even the SuperCon organization locally, talking about inclusivity and nerd culture with Nerdy, a Minneapolis rapper. You know, we're always just trying to connect the dots. What's wonderful is we have this diversity of wonderful artists that are coming to the Levitt with different skill sets, with different sort of missions and musical styles. And we're often able to kind of connect the dots and say, well, where might this intersect with something that's happening in our community, or a community group that might really resonate with this person, this message, this program. And that's part of my role, is to help to connect those dots and make sure that we're being intentional about that, and that we're working with those community groups to invite them and to engage them no matter where they're at.
Wonderful work. I'm just curious, like, what's the kind of reaction? What are some of the challenges, and also like the triumphs of those kinds of activities?
Well, I would say the last couple of years have been more challenging when it comes to community engagement, just based on COVID, frankly. A lot of the communities that we are working with have been especially impacted by the pandemic, or very acutely impacted. And so getting them to, work with us, or to be able to have the capacity to think beyond sort of getting through the day to day has been more of a challenge in the last couple of years. I think that we're seeing that start to lift a little bit more this year, but honestly, that's probably been one of our larger challenges. I mean, in a non-COVID time, getting folks to think again outside the box a little bit is always a little bit of a challenge. We've brought artists into different, youth settings, example, preschools that have literally never had an outside guest or an artist guest before. So really kind of working with them to talk about what they're going to find valuable through this process, sharing with them, again, where we see that this might be something that they could consider, and really listening to what their needs are and what works best for them. It always needs to be a conversation on both ends. We can come in and say, hey, we have this great thing, boom, but that doesn't really work with community engagement. We really try to be open and to be flexible where we can, to make sure that, again, we're meeting folks where they're at in a really authentic way.
Can you share some of the impacts or stories that you've experienced?
Yeah.
This effort?
Mm-hmm. Especially, during Innoskate, I will say our experience with the young Lakota that we met, and having the opportunity, again, thanks to the council, to be able to bring those young people across the state with us to experience our weekend festival here. At the end of the festival, now granted, these are 9 to 12-year-old boys, right? Not big on effusive communication, no matter where they're from. But at the end of the weekend, this young man who was 11 came over to me and said, "Can I hug you?" He said, "This was the most amazing weekend of my life." Some of these kids had never been away from the reservation, had never had an opportunity to speak to somebody from outside of their community, and to see that they were welcome and celebrated and loved was truly, I think it was life-changing for them, but I can say it was certainly life-changing for me, right? To see that need and that desire of those young men to know that they had a place and that they were welcome.
That is what the human connection is all about. And that's why we that's why we're glad to celebrate the things that you're doing, is because they can make those kinds of impacts on people. And we hope to explore a little bit more of that as we get into the the hour. But I'd like to open it up to our panel now. If you have to this point any questions or comments or experiences you've had with the Levitt before we continue. Don't jump all in, I'll jump in at once.
Hi, Kevin Wooster. I'm assuming that the kids in Pine Ridge were in the skate park that's between the school and tribal government offices there.
Yes.
Yeah. And when I was covering stories down there, I often would sit there and watch them because it was so much fun to watch how joyful they were in that area, in the middle of that. And I wonder, will there be follow-up at all with these kids or with this program? Is there more stuff coming?
There is actually, there's kind of two parts of it. With our partnership with USA Skateboarding and the Smithsonian, they have a real interest in continuing the conversation as well. So already we were able to introduce Kyle Messeth, who is the head of ground control there at Pine Ridge. We were able to introduce him to some folks that lead some after school programs. So already there's some conversation happening there. And then our friends at USA Skate want to head back to Pine Ridge next year and help build some new elements to their skate park. They have big dreams for those kids to become competitive skaters. And whether that's the end goal or not, I don't know how important that is, right? It's more about them having a healthy community to be in right now. But they want to help build some additional pieces for their skate park to keep that going. And then we'll be having continuing conversations with our partners at Rock the Res. As we mentioned, they're having this camp at Porcupine, but they've been wanting to have a camp here in Sioux Falls. So there's been some preliminary conversations about, can we collaborate and help that happen so that some of our Native kids closer to the Sioux Falls area can participate. So yeah, and again, when Rose Ann talks about really trying to be authentic in what we do, we never want to be a drive-by, right? One and done with people. Sometimes that is what it becomes, just because you get to know somebody and you find that your missions aren't as close as you thought they were. But in this case, I think we found that they're even closer than we anticipated. And so we really do hope that we can continue these relationships and see where it goes.
I would also mention another wonderful sort of output from the Innoskate program has been the connection of our skateboarding communities throughout the state too. The different skate parks and skate communities were a bit of an island before, I would say. And, this has been a way for some of those leaders to really connect. Walter Ports, who leads the Sioux Falls Skate Park Association, came with us to Pine Ridge to both the site visit to meet Kyle, who really runs the programs out there, and then for the Innoskate Pine Ridge portion of it as well. And not only did he come, but there's been learnings, I would say, shared from both organizations and resources. So Walter was able to arrange to bring some audiovisual equipment to the kids at the Pine Ridge site to help with their skateboarding videos, some masonite that's going to go in their indoor skate park. Kyle was able to share some of just the ways that they run their skate competitions and their programming side, which they just have more experience with on the Pine Ridge side. And so to see those relationships develop, so much so, frankly, we were out there for the Pine Ridge portion of the celebration, and Kyle even gifted Walter from the Sioux Falls Skate Park Association with a star quilt, which is just a wonderful honoring that is done, an honoring ceremony that was done. And so it's been just beautiful to see those relationships develop both on the national level that Nancy talked about, but also statewide.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of things I think that we kind of expect with music, is to bring people together. But the idea that you use skateboarding and connected it with the Levitt Center, that's very innovative. Tell us a little bit.
I can share a little bit about why that happened, Lawrence, because it was part of the thing that made all of this happen. In the 1980s, there was a video made. It was the first video that actually combined kind of video as art form and skateboarding. And it just so happened that the gentleman who made that video chose jazz as the sound score. So when we first started talking to the Smithsonian about, gosh, could we come to Sioux Falls? Did we want to do Innoskate here? And we were talking about this video, and suddenly it was, well, the Smithsonian has a jazz orchestra. Why don't we bring the jazz orchestra here? And why don't we see where this goes? So we actually ended up doing, and this was the first time this has ever been done, that video that is kind of, if you will, one of the most important skate videos ever. We ended up reproducing it. So we played the video on our big Daktronics board while the jazz orchestra played the score live. And we brought the two gentlemen who created the video back in the 80s in, and they were able to do commentary. So we began a really robust conversation about the parallels between skateboarding and jazz, both being improvisational art forms. Because when a skateboarder is skating, he's improvising. It's not a planned route, right? He's going this way, he's dodging the next person coming, he's changing his rhythm, his speeds, same as a jazz performer. You're listening, you're watching, you're playing off the other people in the ensemble. And with skateboarders, they choose their music to accentuate their ride, right? To help their ride be better, to go faster, to help get those tempos. So it just seemed like a conversation we needed to have about really the similarities between the two. And so when we were out at Pine Ridge and we brought some of those incredible world-class jazz musicians out there, there was a picture there, you saw them, they were actually seated up on top of the bowl, the skateboarding bowl, while the skateboarders were going, and they were riffing off of each other. I mean, it really was an improv session between musicians and skateboarders, and it really just showed the similarities of the two. I just have to give a shout out, that little baby, that's baby Thrasher. He is 18 months old. He doesn't even talk yet, and he can ride a skateboard like a little beast.
I want to be him when I grow up.
Oh, he was amazing. He was amazing. So this picture is actually a picture of the panels that we had. There were 6 panel discussions throughout the weekend. The picture that we just showed was actually a panel about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the skate culture. And we had Tracy G, who is a woman's WCMX rider. So she's a competitive skateboarder who started skateboarding. She calls it skateboarding in her wheelchair at 55. She has multiple sclerosis and is on her way to becoming an Olympic or a Paralympian in her wheelchair. And then there's also there, you can see Oscar Loretto. Oscar is a competitive Paralympian who does not have hands and is missing a leg. And he talked about accessibility in the sport and how important that was. The gentleman in this picture is actually Paul Schmidt. We call him Professor Schmidt. He actually is the one responsible for building all of Tony Hawk's skateboards. So he did a lot of talking about kind of the genesis of skateboarding and the evolution of boards to enable athletes to do the very best.
And so the Humanities Council is really sponsoring our panel discussions, helping us to really give contextual information as to like, how does skateboarding culture relate to people who might not have think they have an interest in skateboarding, talking about some of those deeper, pieces about diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was some of our, Pine Ridge guests talking about the importance of skateboarding in their community in Sioux Falls. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some of those different topics. We also had a wonderful discussion about mental health in skateboarding culture.
We brought a gentleman from the UK to speak on that panel. He's kind of the leader in this space talking about mental health in the skateboarding community. And there's the Smithsonian Jazz Orchestra on our stage.
So sorry, just working through.
Yeah, I'm getting all the memories while we're looking at the pictures. I haven't had a chance to really look at them yet. This was our closing night concert. This is our children's concert. Mm-hmm.
One of the wonderful outputs of this program is we really saw more youth engagement, I would say, than we typically see on the lawn. There was a lot of young people throughout the weekend who were very engaged in the various aspects of what we were doing. There was also a visual art component where we partnered with our Sioux Falls Arts Council and Ray Feld's Gallery to create an art alley with active muralists and opportunities for people to just jump in and make their own art as well. And then Nancy had mentioned the visual sound. The Smithsonian was also gifted from Jason Lee, who's an actor who you might recognize from Mallrats and My Name is Earl and Alvin and the Chipmunks. He was a skateboarder and did some very sort of important work back in the day. And so in addition to the visual sound being presented live as a part of the festival, the Smithsonian was granted some of the original posters and files of that and skateboards from Jason Lee and Chris Pastoris for their permanent collection at the Smithsonian. So that's what you're seeing there with the white gloves.
So what's really cool about that is, our festival and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the Humanities Council, we become a part of that permanent record in the Smithsonian of this event, which is just beautiful. And this is a, a picture of all the people it took to put this event on. These are all of the partners that participated, all of the different organizations. There were actually 85 people who worked together collaboratively from many organizations to bring this event together. So that was a wonderful moment to get us all in one spot.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for letting us run through those pictures, Lawrence. That was lovely.
Yeah. Well, and when you see the pictures, it actually brings it to life, the kind of things, especially with Innoskate that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about the collaboration between the musical component and the Innoskate?
Sure. So when it was decided that we would bring in the Smithsonian Master Jazz Works Orchestra, that really became a pivotal piece of how we were thinking about the weekend, right? Just a little personal history. So I actually had the opportunity to direct an Innoskate back in 2015. So that's sort of how the relationship started way back then. And that was while I was at the Children's Museum. And that was, an Innoskate, that was a one-day event. And that's what all the others have been up to this point, right? So we are the 7th Innoskate to happen. But up to this point, they've always been a one-day event that only looked at invention and innovation from a purely kind of science-y point of view, right? When I was doing the event back in 2015, I was really struck by the fact that whenever the skateboarders were about to go do a demonstration for us, and at that time, skateboarding was not an Olympic sport, it was just part of the X Games. So whenever the athletes were going to do something, the first thing they would do is take their music to the sound guy and be very specific about what song they wanted played, when to start it in the song, like, how the music was going to accompany their run and support their athleticism. Sometimes it was a really upbeat, big crash sound as they leapt into the air. Other times it was more kind of a zigzaggy, jazzy sound. And that really struck me as a musician. I thought, there's a conversation we need to have here about this, because this is significant to the sport, but we're not yet having the conversation. Fast forward to 2020, when skateboarding became an Olympic sport for the very first time, I was kind of getting a chuckle, because as I was watching it, all the news reporters were talking about is, why does that kid have his cell phone out before he takes his Olympic run, right? What is he calling his girlfriend? Is he calling his mother? What's he doing, right? And the truth is, same thing. He was calling up the music because the music was supporting his run and was affecting his performance in a substantial way. And so after that, I called my friends at the Smithsonian and I said, listen, I think it's time we have this conversation, right? I know that Innoskate is still going on, but let's take it to the next level and let's talk about music and the impact it's having on the sport. And so that's sort of why we went down the path and ended up having the jazz orchestra here. And then kind of everyone remembering, oh yeah, there was this video that really also shows this, a visual sound. It shows this connection between jazz and skateboarding, both as improvisational art forms. Let's go deeper into this conversation.
I think we can all benefit from that kind of collaborative effort, because we tend to make lines between things. There tend to be imaginary lines between, let's say, science and math, or science and art and religion, and all kinds of things that we make kind of imaginary lines between. And I think the interesting thing here is the potential connection to visible connection, because the connection is already there between the skateboarding, the music, and science.
Mhm.
Because what these guys are doing is like extreme physics and calculus.
Oh, in a big way.
It's all about geometry, physics, and calculus. The only thing is like it's not expressed on a chalkboard,
Mhm.
but they're intuitively figuring out calculus. Now,
Yes.
I think the challenge to the scientific community is how to translate what they're doing to them to being able to write it. And also the scientific community could benefit from the intuitive ability to comprehend calculus, geometry, and physics, you
Mhm.
know,
And I'll
because
add
at the moment we
engineering.
don't have that.
Right. We'll add engineering to that too, right?
Oh,
As
yes,
we
absolutely.
the evolution of the sport and the boards. I mean, it
Sure.
really, you can put Tony Hawk on an old board and he can't do the things he can do with a new board, right? Because of the engineering that's gone into it. And again, the science of it.
That's right. And not only the skateboard per se, but also the ramps and the
Mhm.
design of the ramps and the interaction between the ramps, the skateboard, the weight of the, and the motion of the skateboarder. All of those things are engineering to me is like the outgrowth of the calculus geometry. It's the
Yeah.
practical aspect of the geometry and calculus and that kind of and physics. But that said, yes, the next, it seems like the next collaborative step would be, is it possible, how is it possible to now bring these other art forms into the scientific community so that there is cross fertilization of
Mhm.
the different genres, so that science can learn something from them and they can learn something from science. And eventually I could see that the line between the two uh, dissolves, and I think it's an imaginary line, but we do it kind of like in that Greco-Roman style of like parsing things out in an effort to understand the small chunks, except that when you put it back together, it's a different thing than you
Mhm.
thought with the chunk.
Oh, and to that point, Lawrence, I mean, I think that our partner, the Smithsonian, while they are part of the American History Museum, which if I just think about it in my mind, seems very sort of behind a glass, case. Here are these panels that are explaining what you're looking at. The portion of that museum that we were working with, the program, the Lemelson Center for Invention and Innovation, is incredibly hands-on, is incredibly participatory in terms of how they approach that programming, inviting youth and families to really think about themselves as inventors, inviting that really open-ended thinking that I think we see in both the arts and in science, in entrepreneurship. So they were really the leading force in pulling this program together nationally and worldwide, because they see that connection. And it's something that they're celebrating in the American History Museum as they talk about, the history of invention. And so it's delightful to see sort of, those institutions that we might think of as sort of brick and mortar, stuck in history, thinking a little bit differently about how they engage with the public and breaking down those barriers as you talked about.
Yes, I can see some great potential in that, and I hope that will happen. Let's talk about your general programming, which is not every week skateboarding. You have some other weeks you do other things in between the skateboarding. What kind of programs are you guys sponsoring, looking for, developing, etc.?
So every summer we do 50 free concerts for our community, and they cover every genre of music possible. And you were asking before about, successes and challenges. I will say that, one of my goals in this, because I do the majority of choosing the bands, my goal is that our audience will trust us enough that they don't even look at the schedule to see what's going to be there. They just know that if they show up, it will be something of quality. It may not necessarily be their cup of tea, right? That's a different conversation. You may be somebody who only loves country music and I don't want to listen to jazz, but you'll come and you'll hear something of quality, and maybe it'll open up your eyes and your ears, and you'll find that you do like jazz more than you thought. Right. So I love that when people say, oh, it doesn't matter what's playing, I know I'm going to go and have a good time. And the truth is, if you come and it's not your cup of tea, it was free. You can go and come back tomorrow. It'll be something completely different.
Excellent. Rose Ann?
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would say, in terms of the programming, we're always looking at providing that sort of diversity. So within the 50 concerts, we have 10 different genres of music that we're populating every year: rock and roll, homegrown, making sure that we're lifting up our local artists, garden fresh, which might be pop or hip hop, those sorts of things. So that's kind of that's our summer, 50 concerts every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. You can come to the Levitt and see a free show. In addition to that, we also have done the last 2 years a Friday morning performance for youth and families specifically. So we have, again, just a wonderful lineup this year of different artists of all sorts of genres, but that all are very skilled at performing for youth. So we have a lot of preschool, summer care programs, programs for seniors or adults with disabilities that tend to come out on those Friday mornings when it's a little cooler and the program's a little shorter, to enjoy those family shows. So that keeps us pretty busy over the summer, in addition to some of that outreach that we talked about. We, on a non-Innoskate weekend, we try to do about one outreach event a week.
That brings about my interest in your reaching out to the community. We've talked about that on a number of levels here today, but I'm just wondering about the other community organizations other than South Dakota Humanities Council. What kind of collaborations have you had with them? And tell us about the cost benefit in collaborating with other nonprofits.
I can talk a little bit about that. So one of our most robust partnerships is actually with South Dakota Public Broadcasting. This came about during the pandemic when we quickly had to pivot and go digital and couldn't be out on the lawn. And now what we have is a studio that's been built into the back of our shell. And there's camera operators there doing a 4-camera robotic film, so that they're taping our concert live so that it can be played on Facebook Live. So those who can't come to the lawn can watch it. But then it's also put up on our giant Daktronics board so that on the lawn you have a better visual. And then that footage is taken later and kind of cut down. And we have a couple of television programs that are being done. So you can watch some of the shows being played back whole throughout our off season. But then we also do a kind of shortened version called Music Matters. And those are programs that allow us to go deeper and interview the artists, especially those that we take to do outreach. We often take a camera crew out with us to some of these other venues and tape the shows, interview the artists, and again, play those in our off season. So it allows us to have things still happening during the winter when we can't be out on the lawn, but it also increases that accessibility, right? For folks who, for whatever reason, might not be able to meet us out on the lawn, they can always see the shows digitally.
So is that on a special channel with the public broadcasting?
So it's both on our Facebook page and on sd.net.
Okay.
And then they play it on television on their public broadcast channels.
Okay, so they've made it part of their programming then.
Yes, it's part of their regular programming now, which has been wonderful.
Excellent. Are there any other collaborations that you found useful?
Well, many collaborations.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of
yeah.
like community outreach and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, a couple I might highlight, I was talking about the youth series. Just, you know, that has just grown and grown this year. And we actually have a donor who has sponsored that youth series with the idea that we would use it to lift up the therapy dogs. And so every Friday morning when we have our youth series, we have Therapy Dogs International on the lawn, and folks can come up and just pet the dogs and be a part of that. This year, we also have Sioux Falls Parks and Recreation bringing their mobile recreation unit to all of those youth series shows. The Bookmobile is coming to our next youth show, and they came to several of our Levitt in Your Neighborhood events as well. So there's a lot of partnerships. I mentioned SuperCon. We were able to do sort of an outreach with them as a special event. They're coming back this year to have a presence on the lawn and to try to share some interactive opportunities and some comic book giveaways with different with youth essentially in the community. We've had an ongoing partnership with Sioux Falls Pride, where the last 2 years we've presented an artist in partnership as a part of their festival, essentially. So they do the Pride Festival in a different location, but then we've been able to feature really wonderful LGBT artists that night to invite the Pride community to come out. So just lots of different community partners that we've been working with in these first couple of years of our programming.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of impacts have you seen in terms of what comes out of those things, whether it's with you or between the different organizations that you've worked with? Have you seen, for example, organizations go on to do more things in music, or I guess I'm always thinking these are not single impact events. You know, when you guys do something, there's probably going to be some ripple effect from it. And so I'm just trying to explore the potential ripple effects of what you're doing.
Yeah, you know, I think sometimes we see it very clearly, and sometimes it happens without us even knowing about it. One of the examples I would bring up, though, is just in the 2 or 3 years that we have had, you know, the Levitt here. What I've noticed is a lot of growth in folks with disabilities who are taking advantage of our programming. A lot of that, again, starts with maybe an outreach seed that's been planted. We've done some different outreach that has happened, you know, at Lifescape, for example, or Dakota Abilities. And then we see those folks coming to the lawn more often, bringing those groups. And what's been cool about specifically people who are utilizing wheelchairs, is the Levitt is a totally accessible space for them. And to see their eyes kind of just like open, and the joy that's a part of that it's a rare opportunity, I think, for people who have those mobility challenges to be able to go to an art space where they can literally sit anywhere. You know, they just come in and the parking is easy, and there it is. But it took, in those cases, an initial invitation, often through outreach, to invite folks to come. Once they came, and I think we see this often, once they come to the Levitt, there's a positive energy there. There's, again, an accessibility. There's a real sense of community that I think is something that brings people back. So,
yeah, you know, as you're speaking and coming from where you were talking about the interaction on Pine Ridge before, and I think that's a wonderful example of the potential, because those of us who actually have gone out and talked to them realize that one of the things that is most important is to have kids have a chance to get off the res and to see that the world is bigger than the res. And we take it for granted, but I can say in a lot of our small towns, it's not so much different. You know, it's like people are culturally imprisoned, as I would call it. And so just having people to say, wow, there's a world outside of where I live, you know, I think is a big thing. And we experience that when our young people go off to college, sometimes for the first time. And I know I've had conversations with grandmothers on the res that, you know, their kids graduate valedictorian of their class, they get a scholarship to Duke, they last for 1 or 2 semesters and they can't handle it because they're completely unfamiliar with being around people who weren't their cousins or grandmas or something. And then, so once they're like imprisoned, so the idea that they actually get out, make some friends, talk to some people, it's not necessarily that that single thing is going to change everything, but it's the beginning of a kind of change. So I see some interesting potential for ripple effects. And so my mind keeps going back to how important that kind of work is.
I will share too another experience we had, and this was last year. We had a terrific artist go in and spend an afternoon at the Multicultural Center with a group of kiddos that were there for a summer camp. And she invited the children to come on stage with her that night, right? If they would come to the concert, they could join her on stage for a song. Well, they came in droves, and not only did the children come, but they brought their families, right? So and this, maybe it's just my heart as an educator, I always believe that the way to change is through our kids. So if we can make our kids feel safe and welcome, and then they'll bring their parents, and the parents who may have been hesitant, they'll go if their child is involved. And we see that across the board. So seeing the growth of families coming to the lawn and seeing those kids that we visited with in outreach then circle back and bring their folks, that has been impactful for me.
Yes, and that is so true, Nancy, that the kids actually teach the adults, or at least gives the adults an excuse. Maybe they wanted to go anyway, but they didn't want to go because somebody would say, "Why are you going over there for?" And then, but if they say, "Well, I'm going, my kid's involved in this, I got to go support my kid," then it's culturally okay, and then you can go and enjoy it.
Enjoy it.
You know, so those kind of insights is that's a big plus to you as a director, to recognize those kind of opportunities to bring people in. As before we go any further, are there any other things that our esteemed panelists would like to bring up, or questions that you would like to ask, or comments?
Are they always this quiet, Lawrence?
Well, not always, but I think when we have subjects that people are not so familiar with, then they kind of get quiet. You can see their eyeballs kind of rolling around. But Betty, you opened your mic.
I have been jotting things down because this is just crammed full of information for me for a lot of different reasons. So I'm amazed, and I'm not imprisoned, I think, but now I think maybe I am.
You need to come to the Levitt, Betty.
Well, I wish I were closer to Sioux Falls. I do get there sometimes, but I'm thinking of maybe we can plant some of those same seeds in Aberdeen. And we do have a lot of things going on here. I'm sure you're familiar with the folks at the Red Rooster Coffee House and all they do across the state. And that's just one part of it. So thank you so much. You've put a lot of information out today that I'm making notes on and trying to absorb.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betty. We actually had Better Ride open up for us a couple weekends ago. So we had Dan and the whole crew from the Red Rooster here. They did an awesome job. It was really special.
My favorite band, and I always ask them to sing the birthday song if I get a chance to put in a request. So hope they did that for you.
But that is a wild group. You know, you could actually charge admission for that.
Yeah.
Someone wants to know, could you explain how they could watch the I guess I don't know, is it this recording?
Yeah, so it is being streamed live on Facebook, so it can always be watched on Facebook if you go to our page, which is just facebook.com/SDHumanities. You do not have to have a Facebook account in order to watch the videos, but also if you want to send me your email or just email me at Carolyn@sdhumanities.org, I can send you a link once it's available too that you can share with people to watch.
Okay, good. Anyone else have a question? Shelley, did you have a question you want to ask?
I just want to say that I'm watching from Indiana, I was a one-year resident of Sioux Falls a few years ago and was totally inspired by your art scene there. It is phenomenal. Congratulations to all of you who helped make everything happen there. I still get all your emails. I use them as inspiration for work that I do here in Indiana. So keep it up. It's just this whole skateboarding thing has just got my soul. I just love to hearing about it. So thank you so much for doing this presentation.
Mhm.
Thank you, Shelley. Anyone else do you have that have something? Kevin?
I have a question. Do you have any affiliation or connections with Rapid City in terms of bringing that kind of inspired effort here?
I don't know that we really have a connection in Rapid City yet. We'd be happy to. I mean, yeah.
We met a lot of good folks at the recent South Dakota Arts Conference
Yes.
from Rapid, but no current plans in the works, I would say.
Yeah, they're trying to develop things there too. On this Sioux Falls kind of level, and you got some real movers and shakers there. So that might be some opportunities for collaboration. And of course, you guys, as you said, you were at the arts conference, so that some of them showed up there. So there are some potential collaborations.
Yeah, it's important to note that we aren't just known for conservative politics out here. So there are some other things going on too.
That's right.
The other thing I might mention to you, Kevin, or Shelley, or anybody watching, is that, our Levitt Foundation, the national foundation that is one of the partners that makes this all possible, does have an active grant program called Levitt AMP, which supports not necessarily the full concert venue like we have in Sioux Falls, but if there's an existing structure, an existing space to hold public concerts, they support free summer series, essentially in about 30 different communities. And I have an anticipation they'll be growing that program in the coming years. So there are different communities all through the United States, typically mid-size or smaller communities, that are hosting up to 9 free concerts through that Levitt AMP grant program. So that would be something to definitely check out and think about if you're wanting to implement something similar in your communities.
Excellent. A good way to get started. And sometimes you just need that kind of thing to pull together the would-be movers and shakers into some collaborative effort that can start something going, and then after that they can start a new thing. Well, we're winding up on our time now, so I'd like to throw it back to Rose Ann and Nancy. Are there any particular things that you would like to leave our panel and audience on Facebook with?
Gosh, I think gratitude. We are just so thankful for the support of the Humanities Council for allowing us to do this. Most of the time I'm writing grants for the music. And when the idea came up to do all these panel discussions, I thought, well, where do I turn for this to get some support? Because flying all these people in from all over the world, really, it was kind of daunting. But as soon as I made a call to the council, they said, this is a match for us. Go ahead and apply. I think this is a good match. So just so grateful for the support, not only financial, obviously, but also just for the encouragement that this is something that is important for our community and that can make a difference. And we couldn't do it alone. So thank you.
Rose Ann, anything else you would want to add?
I would echo that. And again, thanks for doing something a little bit different with us too. I'm so pleased by the potential of this program, how we were able to reach younger communities. And I think that that's something that sometimes we all struggle with, both in the arts community, but also in the humanities. And so thanks for being willing to go outside the box with us and to do something. We've heard tons of comments about how this is really a big event in terms of the cultural shift that it made in Sioux Falls, the eyes that it opened, and the really unique collaborations and the possibilities, the doors that it opened. So thank you. Thanks for taking that risk.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy that you guys were able to come on and share your story and the collaboration between the Humanities Council and what you're doing. I think you make a very good point both of you about the inclusion of young people. I mean, that has to be something that we all need to be focused on. And this kind of Innoskate project that you did is one way to introduce young people to older people who will give them a place to make their own lives. Because after all, most of us in, short order, we will be, at some place where we're not the major players, let's put it that way. And it will be their world. And if we don't give them an opportunity to practice in the world that they want to build, they will be crippled. They won't be able to do it. And so that's one of the things we have to really turn back to, like, how do we just let them know we exist and slowly work them into positions of, you make it, it's your thing. This is your world that you're building. You build that world. With that, we
Want to say too quick, Lawrence, Rose Ann, and Nancy, thank you guys so much for being here today. And we hope that we can partner with you guys again on another project, and maybe we can get something out there in Rapid City, and Kevin can come over and help us. So but thank you all for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week, same time, same station.